The sun was sinking low over the vast western plains, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold, and the desert wind carried with it the scent of dust and dry sage as the wagon rattled down the uneven trail, its wooden wheels creaking under the weight of sorrow and secrets. And inside it sat a young bride, her wrists bound with rough cloth, her white dress smeared with dirt and tears, eyes wide and filled with the helpless grief of a woman torn from the life she had once dreamed of. Because this was no ordinary day, and she was no ordinary bride. She had been taken against her will, thrown into the wagon as though her own heart had no say in the matter, and all around her the silence of the desert pressed in heavy except for the steady beat of hooves against the earth. For riding alongside the wagon was a lone cowboy, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his eyes, his face marked by both hardship and an unshakable resolve. And when the girl, trembling and desperate, lifted her tear-streaked face to him, he looked straight back at her and uttered the words that would change her fate forever. "She's mine now," he declared, his voice steady like thunder rolling across a stormy sky. A claim not of possession but of protection, though the bride, in her shaken state, did not know yet if those words meant salvation or another form of captivity. And the story of that ride would be remembered not only as the moment when a weeping bride was claimed by a cowboy, but as the unfolding of a tale where love, freedom, courage, and destiny collided under the vast heavens of the untamed West. For the man on horseback was not just any drifter. He was a soul marked by pain and redemption, a wanderer who had seen the cruelty of men who dealt in women as if they were commodities, men who had bound this bride and set her adrift into despair. And he was determined that this story would not end as another tragedy written in the dust of forgotten trails. The bride, whose name was Clara, had grown up in a quiet town by the river, where the church bells rang on Sundays and the townsfolk spoke of futures and families, and her laughter once filled the meadows with music as she dreamed of love that would sweep her away into safety and warmth. But her life had been turned upside down when her family's land fell into the grip of ruthless men who trafficked not in cattle or crops but in control and intimidation. And when they could not take the land by money, they sought to take it through force, and Clara, the youngest daughter of a proud farmer, became their target, their cruel message to her family. Dragged into a wagon as a symbol of their power, her white dress mocking the innocence of a wedding she never agreed to, her hands tied not with the promise of love, but with the cords of cruelty. And in that moment she thought God himself had turned away from her tears, until she saw the cowboy riding beside her, his eyes never leaving her, as though her suffering had carved itself into his very soul. His name was James, though most men on the trail called him Iron Jack, a name born from the stories of gunfights and battles, where he had stood when others fell, and yet behind the hardened jaw and weathered skin was a man who once loved deeply and lost it all to violence, his fiancée taken by the same kind of men who now bound Clara, and in Clara's tearful eyes he saw the ghost of his past, the wound that had never healed, and he swore in that instant that history would not repeat itself, that this time he would stand between cruelty and innocence no matter the cost. So when he said, "She's mine now," it was not to lay claim upon her but to draw a line in the sand, a promise that no man would touch her again without going through him first. And Clara, though afraid, felt the faintest flicker of hope ignite in her chest, though she dared not trust it yet, for she had learned too well how promises could shatter like glass in a storm. The wagon jolted over the rocks as the men, driving it, cast suspicious glances at James, their hands twitching near their belts, because they knew his reputation and feared his calm more than any man's rage. But James kept his hand steady near his revolver, his voice firm, his gaze never shifting. And slowly the desert seemed to hold its breath as destiny tightened its grip. And Clara realized that though she was bound in ropes, she was no longer alone, for this cowboy had tethered his fate to hers, whether she understood it or not, and the road stretched before them like a test written by time itself. As the night fell and stars began to scatter across the sky like diamonds thrown across black velvet, the fire of camp was lit by the men who held Clara captive, and she was pulled roughly to the ground, her wrists aching, her spirit breaking. But James dismounted his horse and stood near her, every movement deliberate, every glance sharp. And when one of the men sneered and said, "She's none of your concern, cowboy," James stepped forward and with a voice low but filled with steel replied, "She's mine now," repeating the words with such conviction that the entire circle of men felt a chill crawl up their spines, for they realized that this was not a man who spoke lightly. This was a man ready to risk his life for a stranger. And Clara, sitting by the fire, looked up at him with wide eyes, and for the first time since her nightmare began, she felt that perhaps heaven had not abandoned her after all. Through the long night, James kept watch, his rifle resting across his knees, his gaze never leaving the horizon, while Clara whispered prayers into the darkness, prayers that wove themselves with the silent promises James made in his heart. And when dawn broke over the ridges, painting the land with light once more, the chance for escape came like a whisper in the wind, and James seized it, springing into action with the ferocity of a lion, gunfire splitting the morning silence as he drew Clara into his arms, lifting her onto his horse, her ropes falling away under the blade of his knife, and together they rode, her white dress trailing behind them like the last note of a hymn, her tears no longer only of sorrow but of hope. While behind them chaos roared but could not catch them, for freedom once seized does not surrender easily. As they thundered across the plains, Clara held on to James with all her strength, the rhythm of the horse's gallop beating a new song into her soul, and she realized that sometimes salvation comes not as a gentle hand, but as a fierce protector who risks everything to rewrite your fate. And James, feeling her clutch him tighter, vowed silently that he would never let harm touch her again. For though their meeting was born in pain, their future would be forged in the fire of courage and redemption, and their story would echo across the canyons and valleys, whispered by the wind as the tale of the bride who wept in a wagon and the cowboy who rode beside her, declaring to the world with unwavering defiance, "She's mine now." And dear listener, if this story stirred your heart, if it made you feel the strength of courage, love, and destiny, then remember this channel is where such tales live and breathe. So don't forget to subscribe, because every story here carries not only drama and passion, but a reminder that no matter how dark the trail, there is always light waiting at the horizon, and your support helps keep these stories alive. So hit that subscribe button and ride with us into the next tale where hope, love, and courage always find a way.